Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. My name is Beth. I work for Blue Hill Heritage Trust, and every year we look forward to doing holiday crafts at our Blue Hill town tree lighting, and this year unfortunately we're not able to do that. So in lieu of that, we wanted to bring you a craft, and this is actually a great opportunity for us to bring you a craft that is a little bit longer than we wouldn't have been able to do at the tree lighting just because of time. So what I recommend doing is watching this video all the way through and gathering all your supplies, and then doing it as you're able. It's going to be in several steps, and you may find that doing this all in one shot is too difficult, whereas taking small breaks to do it over a longer period of time might work for you and your family. So some of the things that we're going to need for this craft, first of all, the craft itself is we're going to be making some paper mache stars. And for this craft, I love the craft because it's very simple. Primarily it's made of things that you can find in your house. Old newspaper, cornstarch, water, and wire. I have little ornament hangers here, and or string. You may choose to use scissors. If you go with using wire, you may need wire cutters and a pair of pliers. And you may choose later on in the project to use Mod Podge. However, for several of these, including this giant star here, the only thing I used was cornstarch and water for the whole thing, start to finish, as my adhesive. So in order to make the adhesive, that's the first thing that you're going to need to do. And that's where you're going to take cornstarch, about 1/3 cup. And you're going to first make a paste with a small amount of water. And then to that paste, you're going to gradually stir in about 2 cups of water. And you're going to put that over the stove on a pot until it boils. And you're going to find that it becomes thick. And at that point in time, you may need to add up to about another cup of water. It's entirely what it ends up coming out looking like, depending on how much water you need. So you can see here in this plastic container, I have kind of a goopy looking material, and it is basically my cornstarch and water. This is about 1/3 cup with about 3 cups of water. And I cooked that over the stove last night. And I put it in a container, and I put it in my refrigerator. And the great thing about putting it in a container is that you can then use it over several days. Sometimes I have to reincorporate a little bit more water into it. Sometimes I have to put it in the microwave in order to make that a little easier. If you don't have a microwave, you can just stick it back on your stove again, just to mix it up, to make it so that it's not as gloopy. It will get thick at night as it sets. And then you just stir it up with a spoon. So the very first step is to make sure you have paper towel on hand. I love the fact that most of this project is water soluble and therefore very easy to clean up. You may want to protect your surface with newspaper. I'm not doing that here because I want you to be able to see the newspaper that I'm using now. So I've got some old newspaper from a local paper of ours, and you can see that the whole paper, when it's opened up, is actually kind of small. But I like this size. So what I end up doing with this paper is I will tear it in half roughly, and you don't have to be exact here. And then that half sheet, I will then go ahead and tear up again. Now, I can choose at this point to use the paper this size, or if I want to, I can make it even smaller. For the sake of the demonstration, I'm going to use this size because I think it's easier for you to see. So I'm going to take a single sheet of that paper, and you'll see that it's not a square, it's kind of a rectangle. It doesn't matter if it's a square or a rectangle. If you are the type of person that likes perfect squares and you want to do that, you can, but it's not necessary. So I go ahead and I take this rectangle, and I'm going to fold it kind of diagonally in half. So you're going to end up with something like this. And then I'm going to take my masking tape. I may not have mentioned that you need that as well. And I'm going to have that at the ready, and I'm going to take this piece of paper and I'm going to roll it into a tight cone. And I'm just going to keep rolling it around, and I want to make sure that that point is pretty well closed up. And I'm going to take a piece of tape, and I find that actually at the beginning of my project, maybe taking a couple pieces and sticking them to the table or your work surface sometimes helps, particularly if you're working with young kids. This might be one of the things that you want to do in order to make this project easier for them. So you take your cone that you've made. Again, you've just taken the sheet and you've folded it diagonally in half, and then you've kind of tried to tightly make a roll so that you're kind of making like an ice cream cone. And then I'm going to take that tape and I'm going to pretty much put it over the seam to hold that in place. So I've got my cone. Now I'm going to make a total of 5 of these. So I'm going to again fold diagonally and make it into a cone and tape it up. And the great thing about this is if you want to do this stage, if you want to make a whole bunch of cones, just keep making the cones and store them one inside the other, and then you can move on to the next process. I find myself that it's easier if you try to do as much as you can in one stage before you move on to the next. So I try to plan to make at least 2 or 3 stars at a time, sometimes more. Now, last night, in order to prep, I have 3 cones here that I just made. In order to prep, I made some cones. You can see that they are smaller. So obviously I took a sheet of paper that was about, I think it was about half this size, and I'll show you right now. So I'm going to take that quarter sheet and I'm going to cut it in half again, so I've got about 1/8 of a sheet. I'm going to fold it diagonally, and then I'm going to take that cone and I'm going to roll it again into, and see, this is where it comes in handy to get that tape. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to roll it into a cone, and you can see it's about the same size as that. So I've done that with several of these that I have now all in front of me, and that would lead to the next step, which is giving a little bit of bulk to these cones. Now, you can leave them hollow if you want, but I find it's hard to work with them. They need just a little bit of heft inside there. So I'm going to take a small amount of paper, and again, I love this project because you don't have to be exact, and I'm not going to crumple this up into a tight ball. It's just going to be a loose ball, and I'm going to shove it inside there just most of the way in. You can see that it's popping up a little, and that's okay. And I'm going to do that with 5 of these cones, because every star has 5 points, or at least my stars usually do. I've experimented a little. I made a 6-sided star once, just because when I got the 5 points together, it didn't look quite right. So I added a 6th one, and it took me a while to decide that I liked it, but I kept it. And actually, I think I have that one here. So a little bit of an unusual star, but I like it. It's kind of quirky. So I need to fill 1 more of these cones at this point in time. So I have a total of 5 filled cones, and they're all about the same size. I can move that over for a little while. And I'm going to take my tape. Masking tape can be kind of tricky. So I'm going to take a couple pieces and I'm going to purposely put them on the edge of my table. Again, just to make it easier. I think it's hard to hold it together and try to get the tape off at the same time. And you'll notice that these pieces of tape are just a little bit larger. That's because we're going to be connecting these cones together. Now, you can do this in a couple of ways. You can take They're about the same size, but you'll find that sometimes some of the cones are just a little bit bigger. So you can take these 2 cones and you can roughly put them about so that one is on top of the other. And from there, you're just going to take a single piece of tape and you're going to tape them together. Just kind of like so. Okay, and it's still kind of floppy. You can open it up. It doesn't have to be taped on both sides at this point. Then I'm going to take another one of my stars, and this is where you have to start to get creative. And I'm going to kind of put it so that it's not quite perpendicular to those 2. I'm going to put it up just a little bit. And I'm going to take another piece of tape, and I'm going to attach that again. Again, still not attached on this side, but that's okay. So we've got 3 stars, or 3 points of our star together at this point. Now I'm going to take another one. I'm going to flop it over here, and I'm going to attach this star. Now you'll notice that it helps that these little points to these cones exist, because a lot of times that helps to kind of connect to the other portions of the star. So again, this looks really rough, and it's okay. Again, we're still not attached on one side, and I've kind of done that on purpose. Now you'll notice that this doesn't quite look like a star yet. We still have one more point, and it kind of, this would be the time when you'd be like, well, okay, wait a minute, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 sides, and we've got 4 points. Where are we going to stick this one? And this is where it gets kind of like, you have to kind of just see where it fits in best. Oops. And I think based on my stars, I think that I might, based on the points that I have, I think I might try to fit it up here. Now, at this point in time, what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it down on the table, because sometimes it's just too hard to do up in the air, even though I realize it's easier for you guys to see. So I'm going to take this, and I'm actually going to attach this one currently to the back side at the moment. And I'm not going to go straight across the back, but I am going to kind of attach it to one of the pieces in the back. And then I'm going to go through and I'm going to attach it on the front. And I'm calling it the front and the back, even though there's not really a front and the back. But so I've kind of got my star here, and it's kind of together. It still looks kind of funky. It's okay. I'm going to put it down on the ground or on the table, and I can at this point, if I need to, you'll find that a lot of that paper that we stuck into the cones has kind of gravitated towards the center as we've pushed the tops of these cones together, and that's okay. We kind of want that. That helps to give it a little bit of heft. Now, the reason we don't want to jam-pack these with paper is because obviously we want these stars to be light. We want to be able to hang them up. We might want to use them as Christmas or holiday ornaments. We might want to put them in our windows, or you might hang them from a really large potted plant like I have behind me. There's lots of options to them, and obviously you're limited only really by the size and by their weight as to what you can do with them. So making them as light as you possibly can obviously helps out. Now I put a piece of tape across the back side there, and what that's done is it's closed up that floppy section. And you'll notice now that this star, for the most part, is together. And you also notice too that it doesn't look like a perfect star, and that's okay. I find that a lot of times when I put these together, they either have a tall appearance or kind of a more short appearance. But either way, they always feel like they're in movement, like maybe they're dancing or waltzing across the sky or the room, and I really like that about them. If you're the type of person that wants them to be more uniform, you might have to play with a little bit. But in this instance, I just go with it. And so far, I really haven't been disappointed. So I would encourage you to just kind of let the form take its shape however it wants to. Now, at this point in time, we could put more tape along some of the sections of the back just to fill in a few of the gaps. So I am going to do that just in 1 or 2 more places. And that's just to close up some of the gaps, but you don't have to close up all of them, because the wonderful thing is the next step is going to be where kind of a lot of this comes together and it starts to look really, really whole, and it starts to build some strength. So for the next step, we can go right into it from here. Again, if you are going to make multiple stars, what I'd encourage you to do would be to make several of these and get them all lined up. If you're working with really young kids, the portion of this building might be difficult for them, so maybe they help you make the cones and then you put them together, and then they can help out with the next step. If you feel that your kids are just too young or not able to do any one of these steps, ultimately they can do the last step, which is the decorating. That's the fun part. So if you have to do that in order to get to that process, you know, do all the work up until that, that's okay, because I think that the decorating is still fun, and I think kids will still find enjoyment from it. So in order to do the next step here, we're going to take our form in its very basic shape. Again, there's lots of holes, and that's okay. In fact, I'll work on this back side so that you can see that the holes really don't make a big difference. Now we're going to take some of our paper, the exact same paper we used for the cones, and we're going to now get out our, in this case, it is cornstarch and water. If you don't have cornstarch, you could use Elmer's glue watered down, and I haven't done it myself, but you could also use Mod Podge that's watered down a little bit too. I suspect that the Mod Podge and the glue are going to be a little bit stickier, but everything is water soluble, so don't worry about clothes, don't worry about tables. With a little bit of scrubbing, everything will come out. I prefer the cornstarch and water method myself, so you can do this two ways. You can either take this piece of paper and you can kind of dunk it in part way on one side, and then take your fingers and you can kind of go through and kind of wipe off the excess, and you can see I'm already getting it on the table, which is why you want to make sure you're working in a place that's easy to clean up afterwards. And so you've seen that I flipped it over and I kind of rubbed this in between my fingers, which now has this cornstarch and water in it, and it's now quite slimy, but it's very malleable. And I'm going to take it and I'm going to lay it right across that section that has all those holes in it. And by doing that, I'm going to take my fingers and I'm going to kind of smooth it down across the paper and over the masking tape, and it won't stick immediately to all the areas, but that's okay. So I'm going to keep doing this. Now you can do it with big patches like that. You can do it with patches or with strips that are more elongated. I find that it's good to do kind of a combination of both. Sometimes, particularly when you're getting to the points, I'm going to move this so that you can hopefully see. When you're getting to the points, I feel like it's easier to work with thinner strips of paper so that you can fully have them go all the way around the points. And you can see I'm dipping this in some. Now, I took this out of the fridge this morning and it is kind of at room temperature. It is much nicer to work with when it's warmer. Sometimes it's a little bit, it thins it out a little. And it certainly does make it so that it's not cold to the touch. And if you've got kids who have sensory issues, that might be one of the things that helps. So we're going to keep doing this with our paper, and we're going to kind of coat both sides of it. And we're going to keep, as you can see, I'm layering it, and sometimes it gets a little bit thick at times, and I can take it and I can smooth it. And you can see that as I'm going, I'm covering up that hole. So I'm going to keep doing this here. And the one thing I'd like to do is to show you kind of how I take care of making those points. I think the points are one of those things that if you're not careful, you kind of neglect them. And you certainly want to make sure that you put at least one or two coverings of paper over them to make them stronger. If you're going to be packing these things away, or if they're going to be anywhere where your kids might touch them from time to time, the points are inevitably going to be the parts that probably take the worst wear. So in order to get them to stay pointed, you want to take a piece of paper, and again, this isn't quite as much of a strip as it could be, but you take that strip of paper, and I usually put it right up and a little bit over that edge, and then I fold down a little piece, and then I twist. You'll notice how it's off center, so I've got a short side and a long side. So I twisted the top, I folded the top over, then I took that small piece and I curled it around, and then I'm going to take the big piece and I am going to continue to curl that around. And as I need to, if I need to go back in, and if there's a drier piece of paper, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to smooth this down. And I'm going to try and cover, I won't necessarily cover all of this in one shot. You can do that. Last night I crammed, and I did that with one example so that you guys would have it here. What I did was I used a glass mason jar, and I sat the mason jar, I sat one of the points in the mason jar, and I worked on all portions of this star. And as I needed to, when it came time to do this one, I just put a different point of the star in the mason jar. And then I actually let it dry in there. And because this is not as sticky as, let's say, Elmer's glue or Mod Podge, it doesn't actually stick to the jar. It will dry a little bit to the jar, but it won't get stuck. So you're going to go ahead and you're going to repeat this process on every single one of the points. And if you have to take a break in between, that's fine. And then you're going to make sure you do the other side as well. So I'm going to put this piece away for now, or off to the side. I'm going to take the cones that I didn't use and take those off to the side as well. And I'm going to pull out, so here's a star that I did last night. And you'll notice that I completely did one side of it to show you. And I started to do some of the points, so this one's still nice and firm. This one is has definitely got a couple pieces added to it, whereas this one here doesn't quite. You can tell which ones are which, and you can go ahead and bulk them up as you need to. Now this side is still very, very mushy, whereas this side has a single layer on it, and you can hear that it's starting to get hard. And that's what we want. And you'll see that this is a much larger star than what this will turn out to be. And that's because this, I believe I used quarter sheets. And again, for the smaller star, I used 1/8 of a sheet of newspaper. So I'm going to take this one and I'm going to put it aside. We're going to kind of try and move through this process a little bit more quickly. But again, this may take you some time, and it's okay at any point to stop and put this down and come back to it. The great thing about this project is that the adhesive that you're using, the cornstarch and water, as long as you've got a top that you can put on it so it doesn't dry out, saran wrap, stick it in the fridge. I've found that it's good for 5 to 7 days in there, pulling it out once a day or once every couple of days. So you have time, as much time as you need on this project. And you could make as many of these as you wanted as a result of this. This will probably end up start to finish, maybe doing somewhere between 6 and a dozen stars, depending on the size. So the next star that I have to show you is one that is completed. I've done both of those sides. You'll see again, we've gone back to something smaller, so it's closer in size to the one that we started making together with the 1/8 of a sheet of newspaper. So I think that's the same size as this. And you can see that I've gone all the way around it. Now, the one thing you cannot see as well, and maybe if I hold it up against my sweater, you can see, this one has got a very small metal loop to it. Now, you can do a metal loop, and for my metal loops, I literally have on hand a whole bunch of ornament hooks, and I find that these work perfectly. You can cut them or you can use them as is. If you want to go ahead and not use an ornament hook, you can use string, yarn, thread. You could probably use some kind of nylon, like clear nylon string as well, and you can attach a loop that way. The reason that I do the metal is only because I may decide that I want to make this into a Christmas ornament, in which case you've got a hook that goes on really easily. Or I may decide I want to hang it from a window or from somewhere else, and I want it to hang a certain distance. And that allows me to take the string that I'm going to use and adjust it to exactly where I want to put it. When you create a loop out of string, you're limited. I guess you could add another loop, but you're limited, at least initially. You obviously couldn't hang it super close to something unless you made the string shorter, which is obviously an option. So I moved away from using the string. This is one of the first ones I made. And I now put these hooks in. Now the hooks are really simple to do. The only thing that I would say is, so I make sure to add them. First of all, I pick a point, and when you add either a loop or a metal hoop or a metal circle, you need to decide what the top of your star is. And again, depending on how you hold a star, it takes on a different personality. And I tend to want my stars to be tall. And so I bucked the system on this one on purpose, and I put it on a star, on a point that was a little shorter, so that this had more of a wide stretching appearance to it. Again, I tend to gravitate towards this, and so I forced myself to do this because I think it's nice. So in order to do this, you can either at this point in time take your hook, and if you're going to leave it whole, which it might be a good idea to do, at least initially. So when you take your hook, you could, if you wanted to, take this hook and just lay it up against and put the tape on just flat. And then you could go over it with more paper. And you could do that. My thought was that if for some reason the masking tape and or the paper loosened up over time, if you just have that tape on there, you've got nothing to catch that hook. So what I do now is I make sure that in addition to there being like a little hook at the top, which I will eventually kind of close so that it looks more like a teardrop, but in addition to having that hook on the top, I make sure that there's a hook on the bottom, and I take that tape and I make it so that it is, and again, I hope that you can see this, I'm actually taking the tape and I'm hooking it inside that hook. So part of the hook goes in front of the tape and part of the hook goes in back. And the reason for that is because when I take that tape and I attach it to this, even if the tape starts to fail in one place, it's going to have that hook on the bottom, and it's going to have that paper going over it. It's going to have that hook so that it holds it and it makes it extra strong. If for some reason you find that you don't do it this way and your hook comes off, you can always crazy glue something on or just glue it on. You can add another layer of paper. All of those things are possible, but this obviously potentially saves you time in the long run. So now I've already done this hook here. So I'm going to take this one off, but I just wanted to show you how to do that. And you can see that I not only took that tape and I taped it on, but I also then went over it with a few more pieces of paper so that you couldn't see the tape anymore. Now, if you wanted a natural star, you could go ahead and you could leave it like this. And there are lots of ways to decorate where this would be really beautiful, with greens, with berries, with pine cones. This could definitely work just as is. However, I like to put a little bit of a base coat, shall we say, on my stars so that I can potentially do more with them. And you'll see that I have 3 stars here that are coated in brown paper. Now, they're not coated in paper bags. Paper bags are thicker. You can use them. You just might have to, you might have to smooth them and encourage them a little bit more if you wanted to get this look. If you didn't want to use a brown paper bag, you can also go to your local printer, news printer, and they will often sell the ends of the rolls of the newsprint that are getting too small for them to use. So essentially it's newspaper, but it doesn't have any print on it. So that would give you a nice even tone for you to then do whatever you want to decorate with. Or you could, decide if you like that color, you could leave it as is. I've left these as is for the time being because I just haven't decided what I want to do with them. Now what I ended up doing with these, much to my husband's chagrin, I save things often. And one of the things I saved was this paper that comes in packaging. There's a company that I occasionally order from, and instead of using plastic packaging, they use large sheets of this paper, and they kind of, fold it up and they put it in the spots that, to make sure everything doesn't shift around. Now, it's a beautiful color, and it's thinner than paper bags, and so I've saved a lot of this. And I coated, basically, this star, I coated with another layer of this paper. And it just gives it a great look. It makes it that much harder. I'm going to put this paper down. You can hear that it makes it that much harder. And again, it gives it a nice even base so that you don't have any words or anything that you have to try to cover up at the next step. And the next step is the fun step. And that's the decorating. So if you've got young kids, this might be where they come into the picture. If they've been able to work with you all along, great. So you have a couple of options when it comes to decorating. You could leave this as is. You could paint it. You could also cover it with tissue paper, with decorative napkins, paper napkins. I was talking with a friend of mine, and she had asked about cloth, and I think you probably could do scraps of cloth as well. So you're really, only limited to the ideas that you can think of. Now, I have in my house a puppy, and she likes to chew on lots of things. And unfortunately, she got a hold of a rather good book, and I decided not to throw it away. Because it has great illustrations in it, and there are some characters that kind of talk in verses. So I took this book and I cut out a lot of the illustrations, and I cut out a lot of the verses, and there's actually one that I put on the front and one on the back, or the back and the front, doesn't matter. And then I took a lot of the illustrations and I just kind of started gluing them one on top of the other. Now for this one, I ended up using Mache matte. It's very shiny. It doesn't look very matte to me. I still like it. And it is super, super hard, almost weapons grade. So that's an option for you. Again, you are only limited by your own creativity. In this instance here, I have tissue paper, and this is tissue paper again using Mod Podge, and then there's tissue paper using the cornstarch and water. And these are very similar colors, although there's more blue in this one. But you can see that the effect is very different. The transparency of the tissue paper, particularly of the lighter colors, tends to increase when you use the Mod Podge over the cornstarch. And I don't exactly know why, I just know that's the case. The other great thing about this project is you can decide to do something. I decided with this star I kind of wanted to do this like tie-dye effect. And I did this several months ago, and I've had this, and I've wanted it to grow on me and to improve, and it just hasn't. So at some point in time, I'm going to go through and go over this in something better. I don't know what yet, but it's a nice star, it's a big star, so obviously it's one of those things that I can just start fresh. If I want to, I can add another layer of brown paper, particularly if I wanted to use a lighter color over it, I might choose to do that. Or if I'm just gonna make it darker, I may just go ahead and just start, you know, putting material right over that, or painting it. There's lots of things you can do. So with most of these, I have chosen to use tissue paper. Now you can use tissue paper in a variety of colors. I have quite a few varieties here next to me. There are tissue papers that have to do with the holidays, and this one is great. It is tissue paper that has silver reindeers on it, and I used this last year to make a star that I actually gifted somebody for the holidays. But I also have this tissue paper that I believe it's thinner, and I believe this came in a gift that I received. And I just liked it. It's got flecks, kind of looks like confetti in it, and little pieces of, like, you know, kind of sprinkle looking stuff. And this is rather thin. So when I go ahead and I put this over my tan or my brown paper star, it's not going to show up right away. So what I think I'm going to do, and I will start this here today for you, is I will grab a piece, I will grab a piece of white tissue paper, because sometimes this takes more than one layer. Particularly, again, the lighter colors are going to take more. And again, nothing fancy. We get to rip everything to size. Just like we did with the newspaper, we're going to take our tissue paper and we are going to smear it on, and in this case, I'm only going to smear it on one side because the tissue paper is so thin it pretty much goes through almost right away. And I'm going to start layering it on these stars. And you're going to see that initially it doesn't look like I've done anything because it's wet. And as it dries, it will become more white in color. And so I'm going to keep doing this with more and more pieces, and you can, if you want, just coat a portion of the star in this and then just start putting the paper down. You might find that that's easier. But I'm going to keep layering this over and over, and you can even see that, you know, where I've put the second layer over the center, it's gotten a little bit less transparent. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to make sure to coat my corners in very much the same way. In this instance, I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to put some to show you this instance. I'm going to put some of that cornstarch mixture here. And then I'm going to take my paper and I'm going to make it so that it comes up just a little bit over the top of that. And I'm going to fold it down. And then I'm going to start curling one edge over. And if I need to, I will add more of this mixture. And I will fold the other side over too. So I'm going to keep doing that. Now, part of me thinks I probably should have used a darker color so that you could see that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and put this down for a second. And I will grab a bit of the darker color. And I will grab a different star. And grab a nice piece of navy blue. And I think the navy blue would go really great if, and I may entertain this idea a little bit more. Take the navy blue piece, and I'm going to go ahead and, it was probably a little bit too big. But the great thing about the tissue paper, it is so pliable, especially when it gets wet, that you can pretty much turn it around just about every corner without having to cut it. If you want to cut things and make them more exact, you can. But when you do this with a darker color, obviously it makes much more of an impression right away. And I will grab a smaller piece here, and I will do the top portion. This is where the hook is, and adding the hook at the end obviously makes it a little bit easier if you just want to glue it on. But I like the look of adding the hook earlier so that you don't have to kind of glue that hook onto the outside. It kind of looks like it's coming from the foundation of the star. And I'm going to do this a couple of times because you can still see just a little bit of that brown paper. So I will end up going over this a couple of times with the blue. And my thought was that maybe when the blue is done, I might take some white paint or some gold paint, maybe fleck it on here so that it looks kind of like a night sky. I thought that might be kind of interesting. So I would continue on with that until it's completely covered. Now, if you choose to use your Mod Podge, you can use your fingers, although I find that using a paintbrush works best. And I do also want to reiterate that there's no such thing as a perfect star, so you'll find that some of them are, again, here's my preference at going tall, and here was my experiment on adding another point to the star, because when I got to the 5 points it just didn't look right. I couldn't get it to look right, so I added a 6th point, and I'm not entirely sure that it looks the way I wanted it to look, but it certainly is unique, and so I've continued to do that. I've gone with it. And so that's basically it. I think it should, I may not have mentioned this before, but in between all of these stages, you're going to end up with a very wet and kind of flimsy star. Again, this was our star that we put together in the beginning, and I started to go over that one piece of it, that one side, with some of the newspaper, and this is still very, very wet. Now, I would recommend doing a thin layer and then letting this dry, and if you feel the need, go over it again. And you can go over it as many times as you want. You can, again, make these really, really stiff. I ended up going over this with so many pieces of paper and illustration, and the book pages were thicker than the newsprint and thicker than the brown paper or even the tissue paper. So again, this is a very, very sturdy star. And you could realistically go over any of these numerous times and make them just as sturdy, but it's going to take more work. So let each of your layers dry thoroughly if you can from one step to the next. It'll make laying down the foundation that much more easy. If you find that it's still a little bit wet and you put another layer on, you can do that, but now in order for it to fully dry, you've got to have that bottom layer dried and the layer on top dried. So you're just making it possibly take a little longer. In fact, I did this morning because one of my stars wasn't completely dry. So I turned on my oven on real low. The lowest mine will go is about 170 degrees. And I stuck them in the oven at 170 degrees for like 5 minutes, shut the oven. Once it came up to temperature, I let them stay in there for about 5 minutes. With the heat still on, then I turned off the heat and I let them sit in there for an hour, and they are dry. You can use that as a method of drying them quickly if you need to. But most of the time when you have these in a house, that particularly if you've got a wood stove going, you do these one day, the next morning when you wake up, they'll be perfectly fine, dry, ready for the next step. So that's pretty much how you do this project. This is only on how you can do a star, but with a little creativity, I don't see why you couldn't make this into other shapes, whether you wanted to just make a giant circle or you wanted to make a heart or diamonds. These are all very possible. You just have to be creative with how you're going to do your foundation. And again, with your foundation, you can use things other than paper if you wanted to. You could use wire. The only thing that limits you when you put in anything other than paper on the inside is obviously you make that object potentially heavier, and that means you might be limited as to what you can do with it. But this is a really, really great project to do with the whole family. A little bit of recycling, a little bit of using products that you probably already have in your home. And I hope that you take this opportunity to do this project with your kids, with your family, your loved ones. Maybe make a few gifts for people in the process. And hopefully, if all goes according to plan, we will see you next year at our tree lighting. But until then, thank you very much for joining me. And if you have any questions, or if you make the project and you would love to share what you've done, you can email pictures to info@bluehillheritagetrust.org. Thank you very much.